All right, good morning. I'm glad everybody can join us today. This has been a widely debated topic among so many people, and I always quite enjoy it because when we talk about portability, the very basis of how a person could potentially receive a voucher 1,500 miles away in another house at another housing authority where you no longer where you don't even live near it. How can the portability process be weaponized to help clients jump on a very short list, half a world away, and then drag that voucher right back to that housing authority that's closed in your own town? I've dealt with more Karens from New York and trolls, and so today I'm going to destroy them and their quaint ideas of portability. We're going to discuss Code of Federal Regulation, federal statute, and the exceptions to those policies that my company has done such an extraordinary job of getting done. So, I want to bring up another topic because I had a lady this morning. I had a few people troll me early, and I quite enjoyed that. I mean, you get on you make videos, you try to help people, and you get trolled, right? So that's what puts the spice in my life. And I'm thinking about creating a separate channel. If any of you remember Bob Ross from the 80s, that military veteran that painted paintings, The Joys of Painting, I might create a new channel called The Joys of Being an Asshole. It's trolls. Anyways, thought I'd have a little fun with that. All right, guys, let's get on to this. So what I'm going to do today, you want to take out a pen and a pad. Make sure you save the video or bookmark it because you're going to want to go back to it. I'm going to help you understand how you can force or compel a housing authority to port a voucher on a very short list in another place and then bring it right back to your hometown and skip that 15-year wait. Now, one thing I want to tell you guys is just because your car breaks and you run to the library and get a mechanic's guide, it does not make you a mechanic. And while the information I'm going to give you is going to be extremely useful in your efforts to do this, I would still advise you work with a consultant because though materially what I'm going to discuss works, there's a lot into it. And theories have been tested over 20 years that I've been doing this. And so there's a way you have to approach this. There's a lot of legal language that has to be there. And then, of course, dealing with housing authorities that lack a substantial education or understanding of federal law can easily deny something. So we often have to hit them over the head with an attorney. Okay. But I think to satisfy the interest in it, I'm going to make the video that you've all been looking for. All right, I'm going to pull up my notes because even with my great mind, I can't remember everything that's in federal code, okay? It's 10,000 pages. So I'm going to summarize today our exceptions to portability. So one thing I'm going to do is just for those of you that don't have any understanding of portability, let's talk about the basics real quick, and then I'm going to get into the part that most of you want. Portability is a process in which a person may newly receive a voucher or may have survived a 12-month lease. Now, most of you have been spoon-fed the same old bullshit about, the housing authority requires me to live in their little town for 12 months, and unfortunately, I can't move that voucher. Well, that's nonsense. There are many reasons under Code of Federal Regulation, and precisely Title 24 CFR 982.353 and 982.355. Now, that's code, that's federal code. Now, let's be also very clear. The housing authority are privately owned. These are not federal employees. They are not tied to HUD, and nor can they reinvent the wheel, nor can they deny your civil rights, your federal rights. And so they have the same power as a little girl serving you a cheeseburger at McDonald's. They'll either comply with federal policy or they, as a privately owned housing authority, can be sued to no avail. So portability is a process, again, where you're requesting that you take your voucher, you pack it up, and you ship it to a different housing authority in another town, city, county, or state. Now, in order to do that, you'd have to give a 30-day notice to vacate your property. So you have some further concerns as to the landlord, and maybe you're in the middle of your lease. So you'd have to have a good reason to exit your lease or go month by month, or maybe sign a short-term lease. Once you do that, the housing authority that you're currently dealing with, you and that portability specialist or caseworker, would essentially be working with the next housing authority, the forwarding housing authority, where you're intending on going. and their portability specialist or caseworker would determine whether or not they want to bill or absorb. And so we're going to give the example of New York and Florida. Again, as I use in many of my videos, let's say you have that voucher in Florida, or you won the voucher in Florida. And of course, my phone's going to start ringing early in the morning. I'll kill that real quick. All right, so we have that voucher. You either won it in Florida or you already have it. Let's not worry about timelines, how long you've lived there. So what happened is the state of Florida, and you want to go to New York, right? So you're going to go to the Bronx Housing Authority in New York. So we contact the Housing Authority in Bronx, New York, and suggest that you have a voucher from Miami, Florida, and that you would like to request portability. At that time, the New York Housing Authority will they'll accept your request, and then they will send a bill back to Florida, Miami, Florida, or they'll absorb you, meaning they'll say, come on and move to New York, move to the Bronx, and we'll have you relinquish the voucher there, and we'll cut you one of our own. And they can do that despite them being closed, not having a voucher. And again, even being closed 15 years. Why? Because it's your federal right. Cannot deny portability, period. And so let's get into the sticky of this. An applicant family must be allowed. And now, again, I want to quote from federal law. So anybody that wants to troll that, I would suggest go back to making ducks and making videos about fidget spinners, because your interest or your opinion of federal law does not matter. It is irrelevant. An applicant family must be allowed to move to another jurisdiction under portability, provided that the head of household or spouse was a resident of the PHA's jurisdiction at the time the initial application for assistance was submitted. So you're hearing essentially that only proves one thing, one scenario, and that's that you must be allowed to do portability. And then it's telling you that, of course, we're rolling back into the 12-month part, but I'm going to show you how that can be defeated. So be a resident of the PHA's jurisdiction of the time of the initial application for assistance was submitted, and that all other portability requirements are met. In other words, you haven't violated your HAP contract, you've been paying your rent, and you haven't violated any policy, okay? Concisely, non-resident applicants have no right to move under portability for 12 months. That's what you've all heard. But what is the job of the PHA? What is their primary job? It's to tell you the truth, but never the whole truth. You have no right to move under portability for 12 months, and then the but goes on for flipping 20 pages. That's always in the interest of the housing authority to convince you that that one singular policy and not read the rest is the entirety of what they have to tell you. That's the problem when we play smoke and mirrors. If you don't understand what statutes are, you don't understand what the federal code is, then you'd be left with, you have no right to under portability for 12 months. So let's discuss how that can absolutely be shredded all the way through the process. Initial PHAs may, and here's the caveat. You're going to love this. You remember the but part? We're going to move one sentence down. The initial PHA may allow portabilities and moves during the 12-month period. It just contradicted itself. The initial PHA decide to allow portability and moves would respond to a special family, for example, is something as stupid as employment opportunities. I just defeated it with one single sentence. Now you understand? Now this is verbatim federal law. It's just said you can't, but now you can, right? And so we're going to move on. But now allow such moves in other instances. The PHA is required to document the exceptions to residency requirements in regards to portability in the administrative plan. In other words, it's a simple notation. It's not an extraordinary act or where they need to vote in a boardroom, okay? The PHA may also not impose a 1-year residency or allow for portability immediately for all applicants. Now we've defeated it twice. The PHA must also choose to not impose a 1-year residency requirement and allow portability immediately for all applicants, not just people living in the city, but people that live all over the U.S. So that takes the troll, and it's like a slap in the face. So I've just proven twice. Now I'm going to prove it 11 more times this morning that portability, you can snatch a voucher any damn place you want in the U.S., and you most certainly can compel them to issue that voucher despite never been living there and move that thing across the country. And there's little they can do to fight you if you meet these exceptionary rules. And that's the part that's difficult and where you're mostly going to want to consult. All right, so let's go on to some further attempts to find the loopholes. And that is the name of the game, right? Is to understand Code of Federal Regulation in Title 24 and its subsections so you're able to legally make these maneuvers. All right, the PHA is required to document the exceptions to the residency requirements in regards to portability and administrative plan. The PHA may also not choose to impose a one-year residency requirement, allow for portability immediately for all applicants. Residency is determined and based on the family's domicile at the time that the family initially submitted their application for assistance, not at the time they reached the top of the list. And it goes on for a bit. So now we're going to discuss a few additional things. Residency requirements associated with portability are different for participants. Again, here's some more exceptions. If you're a veteran, you have exemptions. If you have a special use voucher, you have exceptions. If you are in VAWA, you have further exceptions. And so now we've blown an additional 3 holes, and for a total of 5 different ways that we can actually tell a housing authority you will comply with federal law, and I don't give a damn about your 12-month policy, period. It's irrelevant. You have no choice. If you're going to violate federal law, then we'll file a suit on Monday, and then you can answer to an administrative judge why you decided that you're going to reinvent federal law when, in fact, you don't have a law degree. You don't even have the right to actually make that determination. So you will be compelled or you will pay out, period. That is the end of the story. You shut your mouth. You do exactly as prescribed by law, period. The PHA may deny the family's request to move under following program regulations. And the reason I want to bring this up is because there are some small areas in which they can deny your request for non-compliance. The request to move does not comply with the public housing policies on the timing and frequency of moves in accordance with Title 24 and subsection 982.354. Subsection C and number 2. And again, I'm just rolling those numbers out. Y'all can always roll back and pull it from the description, which I forgot to add this morning. These policies also include prohibiting any move by a family within the initial term lease and prohibiting more than one move by a family during any 1-year period, because there are some people that try to use portability like a vacation voucher. They're in the summer, maybe they want to go to maybe during the winter they go to Nantucket, and maybe they want to port down to Florida. That is the most absurd thing, but there are nutcases that'll do that. They literally use the voucher as a method to travel the nation and see the world. But they're also clever in the fact that they have figured out a way to have an understanding of federal rules and then engineer it to work legally for them. So I have to both applaud them and then gag at the same time. All right, the PHA must, again, so I think with the policy and consistencies here is that as long as you're in good with the housing authority, you've not violated policy or HAP contract, they shouldn't be able to deny it. Now, there are certain situations in which if their funding does not allow for it, they may be able to deny it. But there's more reasons why they're unable to deny it despite not having funds. And so that's a big part of it. But unfortunately, I don't have time to cover 39 additional pages regarding those matters. I just wanted to give you all the juicy. Exceptions to the limitations on family moves. In other words, exceptions to portability and that fabulous 12-month rule that all of you have written into the stone as if Moses had written the law. But here are all those big loopholes that you're looking for. So we're at 5, and we're going to move on to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There are important exceptions on PHA or Public Housing Authority ability to restrict moves. In other words, there are federal laws that will shut down and sew up the mouth of the housing authority employee's mouth and basically handcuff them to the chair, where they cannot deny portability. PHAs must comply with all applicable federal law, civil right laws, and any limitations on family moves are subject to civil rights, and as well as the Violence Against Women Act VAWA requirements. Three examples may commonly arise in connection with family moves, and I'm going to discuss that kind of in this section. Protections for victims of domestic violence, dating, sexual assault, and stalking. virtually anybody under BAWA and having a situation where you have been mentally abused, physically abused, stalked, unwarranted visitation or harassment by a person, as well as an attempt to defraud you financially by a known actor or person would qualify you. And actually qualifying for subsection 2103 is actually easier than many of these to actually force a housing authority and give them no other outlet in which they can deny. A family may receive a voucher to move in violation of the lease. You may violate your lease if the family has complied with the obligations under the voucher. Again, you have not paid your rent, you've not violated your contract, and is moved out and assisted in the dwelling unit. And so what happens here is if we make that accusation, you can immediately move to terminate your lease. There's nothing, not a damn thing they can do about it. They can't sue you. They can't evict you. They'd be in violation of federal law to be tossed. And number two, the housing authority has been handcuffed to the chair. They can no longer deny you for any reason. But we have to establish BAWA federal oversight rules for that. PHA owners may but not be required to ask for documentation. Here's the deal. The federal government in its foresight has also doubled, in my opinion, have doubled back and said, and here, I want you to hear it again, public housing authorities may or may not be required to ask for documentation. In fact, we don't even have to prove that you have domestic violence. We don't have to prove one stitch of evidence. And now they did say may or may not be required, right? So there are, and again, I don't have time to read through 100 pages. There are lots of exceptions to the policy where accusation of any form of domestic violence would vacate most of the other federal rules on this and allow a person simply to make the accusation, terminate the lease, dodge eviction, and then be able to port. And there's not a fucking thing that any of them can do. And if they were to attempt to deny, again, it would be a civil matter, and then they would be in for damages, period. Okay? Moving on from there, the PHA owner is prohibited from requiring third-party documentation of a victim's status. If the PHA or owner chooses to request an individual to document their claim of domestic violence, dating, sexual assault, and so on, the owner must make such requests in writing and pursuant and outlined in Title 24, CFR 5.2007, which has roughly 178 pages of requirements. The administrative burden for Sally that just got off from serving cheeseburgers, she's now your caseworker. She now has 178 pages of policy in which she would have to compel in order to actually get an explanation of your domestic violence. And I can actually just drown them to death in paperwork. And I can drown them to death in attorneys. By virtue of what I deal with law firms and attorneys every week. So there's nobody that I can't touch. It's like having a army of attorneys that are on speed dial. And that's in addition to the law firm we retain out of Fort Worth. All right, moving on from there, we're going to talk about reasonable accommodation. Remember some earlier videos when I said that we could use reasonable accommodation in lieu of disability to force them under the 2008 Disability Act to comply. So a reasonable accommodation to portability would essentially force their hand in portability if we can establish mental or physical disabilities to meet that. Otherwise, they violated the 2008 Disability Act. In addition to that, we don't even need to be a domestic violence victim. We can compel them on another subsection for harassment in housing or housing-related transactions on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and disability, family status, national origin is prohibited under the Fair Housing Act, and PHAs may not deny the family's portability request. That can be virtually any situation, as little as somebody telling you to fuck off on the property you're renting. That is a form of harassment and thus meets that standard. And so here we are at the 9th exception to the 12-month rule. And again, we were discussing Bob that makes wooden ducks and decided to get in my channel, make a comment section about how he's now become the master consultant and that he can trump that his comment in my channel would suggest that he knows more than anybody. He's a walking Jesus of information, but yet he has no understanding. He just got his certificate out the bubblegum machine, and he's now a consultant. So the moral of the story is, besides me being pissed off a little bit this morning, is that yes, our office can force and compel under federal rules in so many different ways for a person to receive a voucher and move that voucher instantly, and there's not a damn thing they can do. And if the housing authority or its employees decide in all their wisdom that they're going to violate those federal laws, which to me is like putting a little bit of meat on a trap. Once they do that, and I get them to deny, then I further have them trapped. Then there's no release from that, and there are consequences. So again, housing authorities are privately owned and city owned. Under no circumstance may they reinvent federal rules, and there are lots of ways which I will force and compel them to cooperate. With or without their blessings, with or without prayer circles, they will do precisely what's prescribed under federal law. And that's my case, folks. I hope you've enjoyed the video. And, we're going to talk about disabilities and the fair and reasonable exploitation and loopholes built into that. Because unlike the Social Security Administration that requires a judge, an attorney, and a big battle to go get that disability check, I can tell you that its idea of disability and the idea that a different federal agency has, like HUD, that doesn't give out checks but gives out housing based on disability, there's lots to be said in regards to that. It's my job to understand policy, rules, titles, acts, codes, and procedures. And to understand it means that I can also read in between the lines. If we know what's required, then it only requires the reverse or engineering of it backwards to ensure clients meet the standard. If you meet the required standard, then there's not anything they can do. And ignorance of Sally working at the housing authority, her ignorance of federal law makes no difference. It's irrelevant. Her denial's irrelevant. Same thing for Bob the duck maker, making wooden ducks and working at the housing authority. His idea of federal law is irrelevant. It can be overturned. Okay. So I've enjoyed making this video. And I also want to introduce my receptionist. She is currently on her breakfast break. And this is little mama. And a lot of those holes in my chair are from her claws when she was a baby. So if you're a pet lover, you'll quite enjoy my channel. If you like spicy videos, you'll like my channel. If you don't mind a few profanities, I use those as well. If you don't like it, well, hell, you can go over to Bob's Duck Making channel or Sally's Fidget Spinner channel. They'll be glad to give you some advice based on a crystal ball or whatever they've written and use. If you're actually looking to work with an actual consultant with a nationwide reputation, that I can tell you, there's nobody better known than myself when it comes to these matters. I wouldn't be able to command the audience of hundreds of law firms. I wouldn't do speaker events for the Legal Aid Society, and I certainly wouldn't be published in national news on many occasions over the years if I had no idea what I was talking about, or if I chose that I was going to take my advice from Karen and Bob. All right, guys, y'all have a good morning. Bye-bye for now.